I may, maybe perhaps during the questions, be able to address other issues. But let me first thank the Apostolic Coalition very much for the opportunity to be able to address you here today. The Apostolic Coalition is, I believe, one of the very important groups of Christian leaders that try as much as possible to interrogate some of the questions that concern us as a nation. A lot of what we are hearing, a lot of what we're seeing are problems and issues that have been identified or, that have been dealt with at some point or the other. Aside from those who have been in the Pentecostal Fellowship, there are so many different names and different groups that have emerged one way or the other, and a lot of them are the same individuals trying very hard to be able to impact the Nigerian question and make a difference in the way that governance is done in Nigeria. I'm sorry, I wanted to recognize Mama Ezekiel as well. Please. Thank you very much for making the time to come. Thank you very much. There was an occasion over lunch when somebody, I won't mention any names, but there was a gentleman who said to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Buhari, said to him, he said, I think the problem that we have in Nigeria is that people do not have a vision. There's no vision. So most people don't have a vision. And when there is no vision, there can be no hope. But that's, I think, is what the problem is. That if people have a vision, if everybody has a vision, then things will change. So the President took one spoon of food and then turned to me. I was not the one who asked the question, but turned to me and said, I will tell you a story. It's a story about a particular soldier, a general. He said, I won't tell you the name of the general, but the general. He said there was this occasion when the general was in Maiduguri for a conference. And in the course of the conference, they had lunch, All the generals who met there had lunch. They did not give the drivers any food to eat. He said, so when they got to the car, this general was being driven back to, they were driving back to Abuja. He said, then they got to a bridge. And the driver said, Rankadede, I see two bridges. He said, the general said, what did you say? He said, Rankadede, I see two bridges. The man said, okay, stop there, turn around. So I said, the man turned around. And said, the first mama put that he saw, said, stop here, stop, get down, go and eat. Said he had some tuwo and some real heavy tuwo. Said when he got back into the car, he drove back, got to the same bridge. Said, the general asked him, how many bridges you see? He said, well, I only one bridge. One bridge. He said, so the president said that hunger is a basic question. And that when people are hungry, it's very difficult to have a vision. The vision is blurred when people are hungry. But for those of us, and I think, of course, for solving the problem. And for those of us who are public intellectuals of one kind or the other, those of us, for instance, in the Apostolic Coalition, who are trying to see how we can resolve the problem. We cannot afford a situation where any kind of hunger blurs our vision. We must be quite clear. Because at the end of the day, the solution lies with us. We must solve the problem. So we cannot afford to say that we see two bridges. No. We must see one bridge and be able to go through that bridge. I'll just talk very quickly about the Nigerian economy. I'm sure that there's no need repeating that we're facing some of the most challenging times in the history of our country, especially the economy. And there is every good reason for us to say that the times are so challenging sometimes that we want to ask ourselves, what exactly is going on? Just as Pastor Wale said, is this the change that we voted for? The economists will describe what we're experiencing as a recession, 2 quarters or so of negative growth. And possibly, we are still in the doldrums in terms of growth. But why are we where we are? That's important for us to understand, just so that we are better able to understand what steps are being taken and why those steps are being taken. I think that, just as the Honorable Commissioner had mentioned, we had an unsustainable economic structure. Single commodity, crude oil, and crude oil, as you know, is the main revenue earner. 80% of revenues come from crude oil, and that's 90% of foreign exchange earnings. For a largely import-dependent economy, practically everything is imported. Practically everybody who says I'm a manufacturer of something or the other is importing substantial components of whatever it is that is manufactured. So every part of our economy is very import dependent. So every part of our economy is very dependent on foreign exchange. And 90% of that foreign exchange comes from oil. Now, the non-oil sector, because when you look at some of the economic figures, we are told that despite the fact that 90% of our foreign exchange comes from oil, oil is still 9%, a 9% contributor to GDP. In other words, it doesn't account for many jobs, it doesn't account for anything, it's still 9%. Farming, that's agriculture, and services account for the bulk of GDP. But even for that non-oil sector, even for all of the non-oil sector, oil still accounts for 52% of the whole of the non-oil sector. So whenever we say we want to diversify, we want to get away from oil, we can't get away from oil without oil. That's just, the paradox. Because oil still is a major contributor to even the non-oil sector of our economy. And before we can get our way out of it, we certainly still need the oil. So when oil prices are down, there's a problem. Now oil prices fell from about 115, 110 in the 2012 down to about 2014 or so, 2013, 2014. By 2015, it was down to under $30. Now it's between 40-something and 50, late 40s and 50. But that's not even the problem. The main problem is that our projected production of oil is 2.2 million barrels of oil. But with the vandalization that's going on in the Niger Delta, we're losing close to 1 million barrels of oil a day. So that's about a 60% drop in revenue. Now, if you're losing 1 billion of your 2.2 million barrels of oil every single day, then there's no question at all that there will be a shock in that economy. There's no question at all. No matter how we choose to slice it, no matter how we describe it, the economy will suffer a major shock. And that's what has happened in the Nigerian economy, that the major losses coming from vandalization of pipelines is the latest. So, and not just pipelines, the past pipelines were vandalized. But if you know what happened since February 2016, in February 2016, when the Transfer Carriers pipeline was bombed, we lost 40% of our gas, which meant that even as of February 2016, we were producing 5,000 megawatts of power, which was the highest in the history of the country. But with the bombing of that Trans-Papyrus pipeline, we started using 40% of gas. And generation dropped about 2,500 megawatts, and then started to gradually climb up as hydroelectric power kicked in. But I think the most important part of that is that it was a substantial loss in power, which of course has repercussions on industry, because as we know, power is a crucial aspect of that. But more importantly, a crucial drop in revenue, because not just the Trans-Papyrus export terminal, but several others. The Kwa Igbo terminal was also bombed, the Nembe Green axis was bombed, the supplies to Bonny terminal, two of the major sources of supply were also bombed. So these are substantial losses to the oil sector. And once there is a problem with the oil sector, there is a significant problem with our revenues. So that's a major immediate cause of the shock that our economy received. Of course, we've talked and mention has been made of corruption in the system. And corruption, of course, as you know, is always been very, very substantial. Just one aspect, without even looking at defense contracts alone, we are unable to explain $15 billion, just defense contracts. And sometimes when you look at, the sheer amount of money that has disappeared from the Nigerian economy, it's amazing, because very easily we could have avoided a lot of what happened in the Northeast. We could have avoided a lot of what happened in the Northeast if the platforms, the equipment, weapons, and all of that was supposed to have been bought were bought. But the money was simply stolen. I mean, large amounts of money was stolen. If your external reserves are about 34 billion, and you cannot account for $15 billion, which is a lot of this is defense contracts alone, then the enormity of the corruption is such that there is no economy that can absorb those shocks without feeling substantial damage. The sheer shock of that is too much. No economy has equivalent of half of its external reserves stolen away by citizens. No economy has that. So whenever people say that, don't talk about what has happened in the past, it's ridiculous, because you can't. There's nobody here who, if half of your resources were stolen today, half of what you own was stolen today, and then you're poor because half of your money has disappeared, you have to refer to it, because otherwise you are never going to be able to get out of it, especially if you allow that system to continue. Just huge sums of money disappeared, and that is why the country did not have any savings. I was discussing with the governor that in 2012, states, every month, of course, that there's what is called the FAC allocation. That's all of the oil proceeds and proceeds from tax are put into a pool which is shared between the federal government and the states every month. So that's, of course, how the states get most of their revenue, except, of course, Lagos State that is able to get a lot of revenue from tax. Most states depend almost entirely on FAC. In 2012 October, FAC was 1 trillion. 1 month was 1 trillion naira. 2012-2016, FAC is about 400 billion. Almost 3 times, almost a third of what it was. The same states, but there is 1 trillion in 2012, about 400 billion in 2016. Now, those same states probably have the same staff, the same overheads, the same everything. But in 2012 and those periods of prosperity, no savings were made. No savings whatsoever. So now, in periods of relative problems, you don't have any savings to fall back on whatsoever. So that is a state, that's a state that we find ourselves in. And I think that one of the most critical issues that we must address as a nation is the issue of corruption and stopping corruption. If we are unable to stop corruption, it is what someone has described as a recursive phenomenon. One step backward, one step forward, two steps backwards. That's what it will be. Because you cannot produce money and have that same money stolen by your citizens and expect to grow. It's impossible. And when you look at the sheer amounts, we are not talking about people taking 10% bribes or something. No, we are talking about people going into the very pot where all of the money is and taking out substantial percentages of it. When that happens, you really have a problem. You really have a problem. So whenever, and I was, in explaining the Nigerian recession, I mean, the US has been in recession in recent history, or twice, that we can talk about. And we know why they went into recession. We know the housing bubble, that led to the recession prior to Obama taking office. The reasons are obvious. The reason for the Nigerian recession are very, very obvious as well. The reason for the Nigerian recession is not because the economy of the world has slowed down. Two reasons. One, the drop in production of oil, and of course oil prices. Two, corruption. Those are the two reasons. Anything else that you are looking for anywhere else is merely a manifestation of those two problems. And we need to deal with those two problems. One, of course, is shorter time, because if we're able to produce, of course, there are other issues, diversification and all that, but they're all related to the same thing. If you're producing oil and you're spending money, assuming we had oil at the rate it was, and we're spending the money, there will be at least a sense. And that's why we've had what was described as growth, 6%, 7% growth, without any real creation of jobs. Because you can create a sense that things are happening. Despite the fact that there is really no real growth. I mean, if you look at what happened 2013, 2014, there were no extra jobs, no creation of jobs, but there was recorded growth. Because we had enough money, we had enough reserves to allow for importation, and once you can continue to import, of course you can continue to manufacture and do other things and sell what you are importing. So what has been done and what are the steps that we're taking? The first is looking at issues of fiscal prudence, controlling government expenditure, controlling the way that government's funds are spent. At the moment, we have what's called an efficiency unit in the Ministry of Finance, which generally takes a look at all MDAs and what they're spending money on and how they're spending money. That efficiency unit has saved billions because there's particular attention on some specific MDAs to make sure that they're spending money the way that they ought to. We also, of course, will introduce the Treasury Single Account. I'm sure many of us heard about the TSA. The TSA essentially is just putting government revenues into one place, which is the central bank. So all government revenues go into the central bank and there are sub-accounts for every MDA. That way we're able to ensure that government revenues are well accounted for and we know exactly what is coming in and what is going out. And we've been able to control significantly how government expenditure is received, how much is received, and what goes out just by the TSA. We've also complied more strictly with what is called the IPIS, which is the electronic platform for payrolls. In the past, let me just very quickly explain what this IPIS is. Every worker in the federal civil service is supposed to be registered on this electronic platform, just so as to be able to control ghost workers. But several MDAs, especially the services, police, army, and all of that, were never registered on the IPIS platform. And many other, in fact, several big MDAs were never registered on that platform. And that led to a large number of ghost workers. And of course, large revenues being dissipated. I'm sure you are following the case of a particular general, not a general, a particular highly placed member of the armed forces who was alleged to have been receiving 595 million naira every month, from a particular source. It's been charged with several offenses. The 595 million that he was receiving every month and buying houses and all of that was from the payroll. That was not even contractual, it was payroll. So if you can get one person can take 595, that's $500 million on the payroll. It just shows you what's happening or what would have happened in other parastatals and all that. So the IPACE is to control those kinds of payroll robberies and control them and ensure that everybody is registered on the IPACE platform. Everybody has a BVN number. And that has controlled significantly how much money can possibly be lost due to ghost workers. We've also tried to increase tax compliance, and because tax again remains one of the major sources of revenue and should be the major source of revenue. But we've included now about 700,000 new companies in the tax net. VAT compliance, we're also trying to improve VAT compliance. If you've read some of the economic reports, World Bank, IMF, and all of those reports, many of them say that we have the lowest tax to GDP, especially VAT, in the world. And especially even comparing us to other emerging economies. Our VAT remains at 5%. Comparative countries have probably 10%, even Ghana is much higher than us. But there are two reasons why we haven't increased VAT. One is that at the moment, our coverage is only 12%. So increasing VAT is not the answer. It's increasing so that we're able to collect VAT from more people. And so when we increase coverage, then we can start thinking about increasing VAT. So the focus now is on increasing coverage for VAT, so that more revenues can come into the federal plus. Then, of course, the regulation of the downstream sector. I'm sure that many of us follow that closely, the old regulation of the downstream sector, which led to an increase, of course, in the pump price of petrol. But the question really is that when the downstream sector was not regulated, it meant that government was subsidizing the price of petrol significantly. But that wasn't just the problem. The problem was the corruption in that particular subsidy regime. We were alleged at the time to be consuming 55 million metric tons of petrol every day at that time. So subsidy was to that extent as well. But immediately after the regulation, we now know that we are actually consuming somewhere between 28 and 32. So you can see that the sharp drop in what we're actually consuming shows the extent of the subsidy fraud that was going on. If you are paying subsidies for 55, when you're actually then consuming something in the order between 28 and 32, then they just say sheer extent of that fraud becomes obvious. But so the deregulation, of course, has meant higher prices, but it has also meant that we're able to reflect more closely what the actual cost of petroleum is, and it is, of course, easier to get to now get petrol. The shortages, petrol shortages are fewer, and that in itself is an advantage for business and even domestic use. Exchange rate. I just want to talk very briefly about the exchange rate and exchange rate policy. Of course, many of us have experienced some problem or the other with the exchange rate. And the reason is very obvious. There are just no dollars. That's the reason. If you have dollars, the exchange rate will improve. If there are more dollars, the exchange rate improves. The reason why the exchange rate is so bad is because we simply do not have enough dollars. Now, there are all sorts of issues around that. Maybe we'll have time in the course of questions and answers to look at that. But when you look at what our external reserves are today, I mean, there's those who have argued that, look, exchange rate, at some point, exchange rate was 197, right? And some people argued, why don't you just leave it, fix it at 197, leave it at 197. But for those who are knowledgeable about these things, of course, you know that the black market is probably nearer, what people will pay for the dollar. So if you fix your rate at 197 and the black market is 450 or whatever, all you're doing is creating arbitrage, creating an opportunity for some people to make money. It is not, you are not, and so when people say, why did you devalue? I think that it really begs the question. Devaluation even assumes that you did a positive thing. I mean, for instance, if you say China devalued its currency, it seems to me to be understandable because China has the resources. In our case, our currency depreciated. Whether we accept the value or not, the value is reflected in what people are prepared to pay. So the currency depreciated because you don't have enough of it. So if you are earning $100 before and you suddenly start earning 30, it means that there is more naira prepared to chase the dollars, the $30, and people are prepared to pay more. So that is the reason why we're where we are. But then things could be better. Things could be better. And a lot is going on with looking at how the central bank can operate that market better. Because really, what we need to do is to be able to encourage supply, into the market, so that more dollars can come in. And there are those who are arguing that more dollars will only come in when you have a more reflective rate. A more reflective rate, of course, is a rate that is nearer the black market. So those issues are going on. But I think the most important thing is that the central bank has introduced one window and a flexible exchange rate. And I think that as time goes on, we'll be able to work on that such that supply improves. Because supply is crucial. I mean, an investor who is looking at the market wants to be sure that if he brings in his dollars will be able to get in as close as possible to the actual value of the dollar. So anything that looks like it's fixed, any exchange rate that looks like it's not exactly right, will not attract dollars into the formal market. And of course, we are in the process of discussions with the central bank about how to improve the system that is running at the moment. And the central bank is very keen on doing so also. So we are looking at improvements, down the line as we go on. One of the critical issues, especially with the recession, is that you need to increase consumer spending. You need to increase people's ability to spend money. When towards the beginning, I think let's just say mid-2015, most states were unable to pay salaries. About 27 states were not able to pay salaries. Some owing as much as 6 months. Some owing even more. As a matter of fact, as of May 2015, there were about 22 states that were already owing salaries, including all producing states, that would usually benefit more because they get, the derivation in addition to what they are. Now, so there was a need for the federal government to decide to do something about payment of salaries, because in many states, civil servants' earnings are a major source of spending in the economy in many states of the Federation. And so we had to work out the so-called bailouts, and so far we've done that about thrice now, ensuring that civil servants are able to earn their salaries, and of course this will conduce to more liquidity in the system and more consumer spending. Now, how to sustain that is the issue. And so we certainly just need to increase revenues. And increasing revenues again goes back to our ability to control the valuation, which is our oil revenues, our ability to increase coverage, tax coverage, and all the other sources of earnings. We've also tried to we're also working on creating more jobs direct creation of jobs. Of course, the sustainable way of creating jobs is through private sector, through manufacturing, farming, etc. And I'm going to talk a bit about farming shortly. But I think the most important thing that government, now the government can do is to create the space for more private sector activity so that there can be more jobs. And we're definitely creating that space. But as I said, I'll talk about that in some detail. But direct creation of jobs. We were supposed to have started our 500,000 volunteer core program as of October 31st, which should have been about last week. But that is delayed on account of the fact that we are trying to ensure that we're able to get as many of the equipment that we require, because many of them are supposed to get devices. We're trying to get those devices as one. Secondly, we also want to ensure that across the country, we're able to provide those opportunities as we promised. When we put up the portal, the so-called Empower portal, now this volunteer program is really meant to just create temporary opportunities for young graduates to at least be doing something. And many of them will be volunteer teachers, public health officials, and extension workers in the farms. They will earn a stipend and also have a device. They'll be given a device. That device has a lot of training modules, different forms of training modules. And it is also a device that enables them to be able to, on a continuous basis, learn different things. Some will be code writing, some entrepreneurial skills. There's a whole variety of material that they can learn with. And it's also a means of communicating with them wherever they may be in the country. At the moment, close to 1 million graduates have registered on that volunteer scheme, and we should be doing the first 200,000. I hope within the next 14 days or so, we should at least be able to start with the first 200,000 across the country. We also have the microcredit scheme that we're running for 1 million market women, traders and artisans. That's being run by the CBN and BOI, that's the Bank of Industry. At the moment, registration is going on for the market women and artisans, and that's a very substantial program. But these are programs to directly create opportunities for people in society. We also have our conditional cash transfers. These are transfers to the poorest people. Registration has been very slow because they have to go, the World Bank and the Bill Gates Foundation and federal and state officials are going from community to community trying to register people, get BVNs and all that. It's been quite slow. But we expect that that will also be a way of injecting money directly into the economy. The other issues, I'll just take a very quick look at what we're trying to do with agriculture. Before that, let me just talk very quickly about the budget and what we're trying to do with the budget. The size of our budget 2016 is about 6 trillion. But the most important part of that budget was, of course, that the current, that's payment of salaries, is always a substantial part of that. But the most important thing for us in that budget is to increase spending on infrastructure, to increase our spending on infrastructure. And practically all of what we're spending, 30%, is devoted to infrastructure. So we have the Lagos-Ibadan, we have the Lagos-Kano rail line, which which we're building. It begins from the Lagos port all the way to Kano. The first phase of that should start by the end of the year. We also have the Lagos Calabar Rail. Now these are more or less counterpart funding. We have the Nigerian government pays a part, the Chinese who are co-sponsoring it pay the other part. But there is a Lagos Kano rail, which is a narrow gauge rail, which we have put out to concession with General Electric. General Electric is investing something in the order of about 2 billion as a concessionaire on that route. So they will provide the rolling stock. They'll also provide the signals and all of that. In essence, they'll be running the line purely as a commercial line for transportation of goods, services, and persons as well. So the railroads are very important. And then the road networks, we're also putting quite a bit of money behind the road networks. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is one of the major routes, but we're trying to run the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and the second Niger Bridge as PPPs. So we've created vehicles, SPVs, that enable other people to invest in it aside from government. Because ultimately they will be told, the Lagos-Ibadan will be told, and the toll, of course, will be used not just to continue to run it as an income, to continue to fund and pay back the facilities of people, but also to maintain the roads, also the second Niger Bridge. These are some fairly substantial investments that we're making in infrastructure. Now, in the power sector, government is still investing also in the power sector. Now, bear in mind that the power sector is privatized, generation and distribution are privatized. Transmission still remains in government hands. But government is also still contributing to building infrastructure. For example, we still own about 10 plants which are under the Niger Delta Power Holding Company. These plants are now just a few of them are going to be privatized. But we're also building transmission assets, we're building transmission lines, transmission infrastructure and all that. We're also building gas pipelines. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, we signed off on a partial risk guarantee in order to provide gas infrastructure for the Calabar plant. The Calabar plant is a 500 megawatt plant, and we have a private investment of something in the order of almost $600 million US dollars to provide that power plant with gas. And of course, once that power plant begins to run, we would have an additional 500 megawatts of power. It's public-private in the sense that the asset itself is owned by the government, but the private sector individuals are taking it over. So that is for infrastructure. Again, perhaps we might have a bit of time to look at that, perhaps for the questions. But we're looking substantially at increasing our spend on infrastructure and encouraging private sector to do the same. We're also encouraging private sector, game-changing private sector infrastructure projects, because we believe that the private sector has the resources and in far in excess of what government can possibly spend. Just to take a few examples, the Dangote refinery, which is being built in the Lekki port here, is 650,000 barrels of oil a day. It's able to refine 650,000 barrels of oil a day. That's larger than all of the federal government-owned refineries put together. And 50,000 barrels of oil a day, if we're able to refine that, we'll save 30% of what we spend at the moment importing refined petroleum, which will mean 30%, we'll be able to save 30% of foreign exchange that we're spending at the moment. So that's the sort of thing that's game-changing, and it's probably the largest single-line refinery in the world. There's also a subsea pipeline, which is being built. The subsea pipeline is a very, very major investment. It's about $3.5 billion. And that will pass through practically all of the gas producing points and comes down here to Lagos. It's a very substantial investment, and of course it will help with vandalization and all that as well, because it's actually embedded in the sea as well as, and it will be protected from the kinds of vandalization that we've seen. So there are some private sector investments that are of a game-changing nature that we're supporting in every way in order to ensure that they are able to meet their deadlines and make a real difference in the economy. Okay, so let me just very quickly talk about agriculture. Agriculture is an equation of jobs. Agriculture is crucial because it still remains one of the major ways by which our country is able to provide job opportunities. As a matter of fact, aside from services, agriculture is a major contributor to GDP. It creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, what we've tried to do is to meet the challenges of agriculture. The major challenge is that we're not able to meet even domestic food demand. A lot of money is spent, a lot of foreign exchange is spent importing food. A lot of foreign exchange is spent importing rice, importing fish, etc. So even domestic demand we are unable to meet despite the vast hectare of arable land that we have. The reason why that is so is because we have an input system, fertilizers, seeds, etc., that is inefficient. The input system is inefficient. We don't have enough fertilizer, we don't arrive in time, we don't have enough improved seedlings, inadequate seeds, etc. The second thing is our inability to export significantly at the levels that are required for market success. It's not, we certainly, with what we have, with all that we have, we should be able to export significantly in order to let it make sense for the farmer and let it make sense for those who are in the value chain. So those are the two main problems. Part of the reason why we are able to export significantly is because of the standard setting and maintaining standards. All of what we're supposed to be able to do is to be able to set certain standards for the quality of what we're exporting. Many times, quality is weak, the standard setting is weak, so the quality is poor. And so these are the sorts of problems that we're trying to work on. But we've set some targets. We've set targets for rice, wheat, tomatoes, and we've set targets for self-sufficiency in those particular crops. For example, rice. We're saying that we should, by the end of 2018, be self-sufficient in rice production. It's a very ambitious target, but it's entirely possible. We are, at the moment, the rice needs 7 million tons or so. We need about 7 million tons a year. But at the moment, we are producing something just over 3.5 million tons or so. Now, we can do much better than that. Because when you look at some of the places where we are producing at the moment, Kebbi, Jigawa, some of the places where there is a lot of activity. And there's quite a bit of activity, about 11 states where there is a lot of activity in rice production. We expect that access to funding, if we're able to give the farmers sufficient access to cheap funds, and we're able to give them fertilizer at the right time, provide improved seedlings so that hectare can improve, they can literally triple their production. Kebbi State and Jigawa State have already shown that anything is possible with rice production. I mean, they are already producing, between them, they are producing over 1.5 million tons between them, and they can do much more. Sometimes the problem with that is that when farmers produce, they expect that somebody will buy at a certain price. Now, once there is enough in the market, prices begin to fall. And once prices fall, farmers, of course, are discouraged and don't want to go do the same kind of output the next season. But what we're trying to do is to ensure that we're able to buy off the farmers and store so that we're able to control the price and give them a fairly decent price, for their production. I was in Zamfara about 3 weeks ago or so, and of course the farmers are very happy because prices are high. Farmers are doing very well. People in this part of the world, in the urban areas, are never happy when prices are high. Of course, the market, the farmers are quite happy when that is going on. What is more for the farmers, especially in the north, because of the depreciation in the naira, a lot of North African states are coming to buy farm products and they are buying it. One of the because of the depreciated currency is that your exports are cheaper, so you are supposed to be able to export more. So we're experiencing that already, but we need to be able to capture what is being exported, because a lot of the exports, if you go to any of the border northern states, you just see truckloads of produce going, people bringing their safer, buy the produce. So we need to improve, we need to increase production, because there is so much that we can do there's so much that we can do in the area of agriculture. But more importantly, the value chain. There is a lot going on now. There are so many people who are getting into the agro-allied business now. We're looking at people who are, in fact, tomorrow I'm going to be commissioning a shea butter factory. There's so many people are going into shea butter manufacturing at various levels. People are looking at all manner of, value chain inputs here and there, and they're doing quite a bit of work. So I think that what we will be seeing in the next few years, will be a great deal of attention if we're able to keep our focus on agriculture and the agro-allied value chain. Look at cashew processing. There's a lot of that going on now. Greenhouse farming. There's a lady, I think I'm not even so sure whether where she operates from now, but she has a greenhouse farm where they farm vegetables, huge tomatoes and all that, using the greenhouses. And there's so much that's going on in that particular area. And I think that if we keep our focus, agriculture and the agro-allied value chain is going to be very, very big in the next few years. Manufacturing, as I pointed out, the major problem with manufacturing today is what we need to import. But we're setting up free trade zones and export processing zones, especially for garments, leather, and cocoa processing. We're looking at how to increase the capacity of people to do business in these free trade zones. And a lot of work is already going on in that particular area. I'm going to just stop so that you can, I believe, ask a few questions, because I think that if I go on, there's still quite a few things, but perhaps because of questions, you might want to ask a few questions so that I'll be able to address some of the other issues. But I think I'll just stop here. Thank you.